Is abiogenesis, or the genesis of life, an integral aspect of the evolutionary model?
Oh, yeah, of course, because think with me for a minute. Abiogenesis is simply the belief that rocks become alive by random chance. Now, you think about it. Evolutionists know we exist. Therefore, we had to come into existence. How did we come into existence? Well, you have ultimately only two possibilities. The first possibility is that we are the result of a creator God. Now, I'm not saying necessarily the one of the Bible, although that's the one I believe, but is that there's an outside creator God of somebody that created it. Or we came about by a totally random chance process without any God at all. After all, evolution is the religion of the atheist, or more correctly, the religion of secular humanism. And so, since their God is the God of random chance, there cannot be any outside intelligence, designer, creator God. They must therefore believe in abiogenesis, which is that rocks became alive by random chance. Of course, it begs the question, where did the rocks come from? You see, the evolutionists cannot regress because they come to a point where they have to say, well, it's just eternal. Uh, think about it for a second. Simply ask a simple question. You know, uh, where did people come from? Well, they say, oh, that's simple. People came from some kind of a primate. Uh, Not being specific, because to them they haven't figured out which one it is yet, but they're sure that a primate evolved by random chance into people. Then you ask, okay, where did the primate come from? And they will say, well, the primate came from a mammal prior to primates. Where did it come from? From a reptile. Then you ask, well, where did the reptile come from? They say, oh, they came from amphibians. Where did the amphibians come from? Oh, they came from fish. Where did the fish come from? From single-celled creatures. Where did the single-celled organisms come from? Oh, rocks. And then you ask them, where did the rocks come from? And they say, well, the rocks are just eternal. They cannot give you a reason for the existence. And so simply by asking cause and effect questions, cause and effect reasoning disproves evolution and proves creation. Because they cannot give you an answer for where the rocks came from, and they believe by faith rocks become alive by random chance. One question I ask audiences is, when did you see the last time a rock become alive by random chance? Nobody's ever seen it. You have to believe it by faith. It's religious. And it's impossible. First of all, water destroys DNA. And yet you have to believe that the most complex molecule found in the universe, the DNA molecule, came into existence in a fluid environment. And you have the chicken and egg problem. You cannot have DNA without RNA. You can't have RNA without DNA. So which one came first? Well, the answer is they both had to come into existence at the same time. Nobody has ever been able to show how the reticulum came into existence, and yet it's absolutely essential for proteins to fold. Nobody has ever, even with a supercomputer, been able to figure out how to fold a protein. And yet the proteins in your body fold all the time. We're talking about amino acid chains, proteins with tens of thousands, 50,000 atoms in them that are made in a long string. Then they go into a little capsule inside your cells, fold where nobody can see it happening, and then the door opens, and I'm serious, this is actually what it looks like, and the folded protein comes out, and then it's checked to see whether it's right or not, and if it's not checked, it's sliced back into little pieces, and the pieces are reused to make new proteins. I mean, the whole concept that these processes could come about by random chance is ludicrous. All of them had to come into existence whole and complete. And a classic example would be photosynthesis. Everybody's familiar with photosynthesis. 99% of all life on Earth requires photosynthesis at some time in its life. And yet, if you remove one step in the photosynthetic process, it doesn't work, which means that it had to come into existence whole and complete. It could not have evolved from something less. The same thing is true of the amino acids in our bodies, the proteins in our body, the folding process of the proteins. Uh, Now we know that there are three levels of intelligence in the DNA, not just one. I mean, when Francis Crick and Dr. Watson found the DNA molecule structure, didn't know the code, but found the structure in 1953, they won the Nobel Prize. However, we've only found out recently how to read the letters, but we still don't know where the words, sentences, and paragraphs are. We're still working on that. Um, and now we find out that it's far more complex because we have epigenetic information, which is the histones wrapped around the DNA that control the information being read or not read. We now know that one human gene is not going to produce everything, that in fact genes work together to produce things, but we know that human genes can produce, the same genes can produce up to 5 different proteins and do it on demand. And so something has to tell it to make this protein now, and the next time make that protein, and then the next time go back to the first one, and they're all different. What tells it to do that? And you don't think about it in your mind. I mean, if you ever told your body, if you're in your mind, have you ever told a cell to form? Have you ever told a cell in your stomach to digest the food? It just does it automatically, correct? And yet it requires intelligence to put these systems together. And now we know that there's a third level of intelligence that if the first one didn't blow your mind, and it ought to, and the second one didn't blow your mind, it definitely ought to, then how about the third level of intelligence we know of in the DNA? Now, I'm not sure whether you're familiar or not. I can tell you're pretty up on this stuff. Uh, but in the DNA, we have sentences that can be read in both directions and give information that's different without changing the placement of the characters.
Oh, I know, it's amazing. The epigenetics is really taking away those beneficial mutations as well.
Well, but the epigenetics, that's the histones we're talking about there. That's the second level. The third level
Mm.
is the ability to write information in both directions without changing the position of the characters to get meaningful information in both directions. Have you ever tried, there's the sentence about how to learn how to type and hit all the characters, the lazy fox jumped over that, whatever, the sleeping dog or something. But the fact of the matter is, uh, now that you've constructed that sentence with every letter of the alphabet in it, well, the information you understand going in one direction, but what if you didn't change the characters in that sentence, but could read it in the opposite direction with a different message and have a viable message?
Yeah, I guess that would make an even better, stronger argument for that irreducible complexity.
Well, we have irreducible specified complexity. Now, I'm not a member of the intelligent design movement. I'm a biblical scientific creationist. I'm not against the ID guys. They've got some great proof that evolution is not true, but they're not us. We are trying to get people saved, and they are not necessarily trying to get people saved. And most of them believe in an old Earth. But I'm not against them at all because they're coming up with very good biological arguments to prove that evolution is not true. And I just want to state that. But we do see specified complexity, intelligent design, which certainly God, the creator, is an intelligent designer. And we see this perfection and today, the single most expensive supercomputer cannot do what your 3 to 3.5 pound brain can do.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Now, I got another one of these little throwouts for you. How many people listening have heard an evolutionist teach them in class or wherever and say, well, we only use 10 or 15% of our brain?
Oh, yeah.
You heard that, right?
Much less. Growing up, it was probably what, 2%? They said 10%.
Well,
Yeah.
some say 10, some say 15, but regardless of which, they say we don't use the whole thing. And how much more could we accomplish if we used all our brain? I mean, that's the concept, correct?
Yeah.
Now, there are two fallacies to that whole thing. And I want people to think through this. Evolutionists say, well, you only use 10 or 15% of your brain. If that's true, it disproves evolution. Their very statement disproves evolution. for two reasons. Number one, how would you know? How would you know? You don't know how much of your brain you're using unless, now see, I openly admit our brains are imperfect. I openly admit it's in a state of decay, and genetic information includes the genes dealing with intelligence. We are in a state of decay. We're going downhill. But, but think about it. How would you know we were only using 10 or 15% of our brain unless you had a perfect brain to compare it to?
Good point.
The truth is, we may be using 85% of our brain. I don't know because again, we don't have there's only been three perfect human brains in human history: Adam, Eve, and Jesus. And none of those brains are around to compare with. So when they so boldly say that you only use 15 or 10% or 2% of your brain, it's a totally invalid statement because unless you have a perfect brain to compare it to, you don't know. And I suspect that we use a lot more than they think as a percentage, but I openly admit we're not perfect and we don't have perfect brains and we're using less than 100%. So first of all, that statement is utter nonsense. This is why evolutionists are irrational, unreasonable, illogical, and unscientific. But there's a second thing about it as well. According to evolutionary theory, evolutionary religion, evolutionary philosophy, you only evolve that which you need to evolve further. Is that correct?
Right.
So why would you evolve a brain capable of 100% but only use 15? That means your brain had evolved 85% of a, well, useless organ. According to evolutionary theory, that's not the way it works. And so the very argument that they so glibly put out there disproves them for two very valid reasons.